there's a name we haven't talked about in a while when it comes to the Bloodline Saga, and that is The Rock, who we were talking about all the time leading into WrestleMania 40. When he made his return back in January, he uttered those four famous words, head of the table, and that set things in motion where we thought we were going to get The Rock versus Roman Reigns. We know that didn't happen. WWE made the pivot, as it's been called now, to get us to Cody Rhodes versus Roman Reigns. Cody wins the title, and everyone goes in a different direction, seemingly, after WrestleMania 40. The Rock goes away to do more filming for his movies. Cody becomes the champion and has had successful title defenses since then. And then we know Roman Reigns also went away for a bit and now has made his big return to avenge the Bloodline, or Solo Sikoa's version of the Bloodline. But the interesting question now becomes, when does The Rock come back? And if he does, how do they do it? And I think things are starting to become more and more clear based on how they are putting this all together. And while we are still months away, likely, from the return of The Rock, I think at least we're starting to piece it all together and understand how this thing could unfold. If you remember back in April, I did a video talking about, and you can see the thumbnail here, talking about how there were many hints that we know WWE was dropping in this Bloodline scenario to probably eventually lead us to what we're going to get to with, The Rock and Roman Reigns face-to-face again, although they will be on the other side, you would expect, of this whole Bloodline thing. But if you remember, we were talking about, something that was starting to become very clear. And as you can see on the screen here, and if you remember the video we did back in April, that was a while ago, but you started to see Solo, right, make that movement more towards The Rock. There were things that Solo Sikoa was doing that was pushing him further and further towards The Rock, both physically and just in the way he was acting. We mentioned even the little things that Solo was doing. If you go to WrestleMania 40 in the main event, right, it's Solo yelling at Roman, and you could start to see everything to where they were going to try to overthrow Roman Reigns. But we haven't seen The Rock do that because The Rock hasn't been on WWE television since, that sort of famous interaction with Cody Rhodes on the Raw after WrestleMania. But we've not seen The Rock since then. But we know all the hints were being dropped about Solo kind of coming around to the way of the thinking of The Rock. And we knew that the power struggle was going to exist between The Rock and Roman Reigns anytime there is a discussion with the Bloodline. They are both part of the family, and even with The Rock not there, we know there's also the potential that The Rock actually is there. And as you guys know, and it brought up in the comments before, the most likely scenario you would think is going to be The Rock coming back and either being revealed in some way, directly or indirectly, as the person who has been pulling the strings, perhaps, behind this new version of the Bloodline, or it's The Rock coming back and realizing that the new version of the Bloodline is not exactly what he was hoping for, perhaps when he was, trying to sort of mold Solo Sikoa into the person he wanted him to be, and then The Rock decides to take things into a different direction or take it into his own hands to try to avenge his, maybe perhaps, other version of the Bloodline that is not involving the one with Roman Reigns. It sounds kind of confusing, but we know everyone has different things that they are trying to achieve here. Everyone has different motivations, but it all comes back to power. And I think that's where you're starting to see this whole thing play out. Roman Reigns comes back, and we know what this is going to lead to, right? This is now kind of a situation where you're ping-ponging who has the advantage. You're going from one side to the other, meaning that it was, the Bloodline heading into WrestleMania 40 with the advantage because The Rock came back, you had him with the group, everything was on their side. Since then, it's been Solo building up the advantage on his side with his version of the Bloodline, getting all the power, bringing in Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa, Jacob Fatu. And then Roman Reigns comes back to bring the power back to his side. So we talk about the ping pong effect here, where it's just bouncing back and forth with who has the advantage. But I think when you're looking at this from here on out, right, people have talked about, Solo Sikoa being in the tribal chief role and Roman Reigns now playing up the original tribal chief idea. But if you really think about it, in my opinion, the only two people that can really balance the power, if you're going to have Roman Reigns bring the original Bloodline back into play, which we fully expect to happen before we get to that WarGames match at Survivor Series. So we're fully expecting Roman Reigns, Jey Uso, Sami Zayn, Paul Heyman. I'm not saying Heyman's going to be in the WarGames match. We're still discussing, of course, who could be that fifth member of the original Bloodline team. Many people think it could be Cody. And we'll get to that in a second because that could play into The Rock's future with the bloodline here. But if that is the team, and you're looking on the other side and you're seeing Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga, Tonga Loa, I don't think The Rock's coming back for WarGames. Just, my personal opinion, I don't think he's going to come back for that match. I feel like the earliest The Rock is going to come back is going to be January, perhaps, for the road to WrestleMania 41. Perhaps he has a match at the Rumble. Perhaps he has, we know he's going to have a match at WrestleMania 41. We just don't know if it's going to be against Cody or Roman Reigns. But the only two people to balance out the power, I think, for Solo's side of this whole thing is The Rock and it is Jacob Fatu. I think those are the two biggest kind of forces here when you talk about the matches that you're going to build to with Roman Reigns. It is a match against Jacob Fatu, and it is a match against The Rock. Yes, we feel like Reigns is going to have a one-on-one match with Solo at some point. But, again, I don't know that feels as big as a match with Jacob Fatu or The Rock at this point, just because of how they're building it, right? And we know that. They're keeping Jacob Fatu away from Reigns for a reason, and they're having Reigns interact with Solo because you are going to get to that at some point. But those, to me, are still the two bigger matches. And so, because you have each of these sides sort of gaining momentum, right? Back and forth, Solo's going to regain the upper hand, probably at some point. And maybe that is where Solo introduces a Hikuleo or something, right, from New Japan. Maybe he's coming in, and that starts to shift the power back in his side. But here's what's eventually going to happen. When you do have the WarGames match, I think it's pretty clear that the originals are going to have to win that WarGames match, right? It is going to be Reigns, Jimmy Uso, Jey Uso, and Sami, and whoever else standing tall at the end of that match. That would be my expectation. Unless, you do decide to go the route where all of a sudden, hey, we're not just going to push Jacob Fatu as this, just absolute most dangerous man in the world. We're going to have this guy just run through everybody, and he's the guy who comes out of WarGames as the winner. But again, we have a lot of time to figure out exactly how they're going to do it. But my thought is, if you're looking at The Rock's future and you're trying to figure out what is going to be the reason that The Rock comes back and what is the reason that ultimately it perhaps is revealed that The Rock is the person that, two scenarios, as we've said, either has been trying to pull the strings from, the darkness here, basically, with Solo Sikoa and trying to kind of reform this new bloodline the way he wants it, or he realizes what Solo's doing is not working, and he converts everyone to his side, right? To where you do have kind of The Rock's version of the bloodline, you have Reigns' version of the bloodline, and maybe that's where the dynamic of power shifts, back into within the story. But if you do have the originals win the WarGames, I think that is where that is kind of the thing that puts in motion the idea that it forces The Rock to come back for the throne, basically, right? Like, he's coming back to make Reigns realize that, his grandfather, High Chief Peter Maivia, like, The Rock is higher up the food chain, as we talked about before, and that's what we feel like they're going to want to play up. And so I think you have to now look ahead, because we are now in that stage where we know what we're building towards. We know the big match is coming. We know it's still a couple months away, and you're going to have singles matches around that somewhere, like we said, whether it's Reigns versus Solo, Reigns versus Jacob Fatu, and other different combinations. You're going to have tag team matches based on the tag team title situation on both brands right now, with the Bloodline holding, the WWE tag team titles, expecting Jey Uso and Sami Zayn to hold the tag team championships. But the biggest thing now left, you've gotten the big Roman Reigns return. Now the next biggest thing are not just some of these matches, it's the return of The Rock. And knowing that that is going to take this story, again, into another different direction, which we know it's been going a lot of different ways here. You've had a lot of things play out. But now that you've got Reigns back, that to me is the thing that now puts in motion the idea that the next thing that is going to, again, take this thing to another level is going to be The Rock's return. Even if that is months away, what is going to be the reason that he has to return? And I think that is where, as we look ahead, and I'm starting to put everything together, with the WarGames match and everything, November to January, right? You're going from Survivor Series to Royal Rumble season, and then to WrestleMania 41 season. Like, that is the prime time, I think, to where you have The Rock come back and you really take this thing up another level. And I think it's where you can look back and see the different things that have happened, whether it is hinting at the relationship he's had with Solo up to WrestleMania 40 and kind of knowing what Solo did from there. How has The Rock played a role in that? And then it's also The Rock, trying to really force as much as he can. He's the final boss, right? He's the guy that's higher up in the bloodline tree, and you have Final Boss versus the original Tribal Chief, Rock versus Reigns. We still don't know if they're going to do that at WrestleMania 41. Certainly, they've been dropping all the breadcrumbs to make you think they're going to do Rock versus Cody. There are a lot of potential options in play here, and I think the most important thing as we look at The Rock's future with the Bloodline is going to be what is the one thing that brings him back, and I think it is sort of what's going to frustrate The Rock the most based on what we've seen from him leading into, the WrestleMania season this year, and now knowing kind of what, he is doing, right, as the final boss and everything that he's kind of portrayed since he did come back and make that swap at the WrestleMania 40 kickoff event in Las Vegas. That's where we saw kind of the big change from The Rock. And that's another reason why you would say, all right, if they're going to go back to Rock and Cody, it's kind of where it all started. The slap heard around the world when The Rock slapped Cody Rhodes. It happened in Las Vegas. WrestleMania 41 is going to take place in Las Vegas. So that may be the match they get to. But I think if you add Cody into the WarGames stuff, it would make sense to do it that way. But it does feel like you have to bring The Rock back into this bloodline stuff, and I don't know that you're going to separate that. Even if they do decide to do Rock versus Cody, I still think, you have to have that big reveal, which could mean they eventually overthrow Solo, right? There's just so many ways this thing can play out. But I think the way they're doing it now, having, kind of one side have the advantage, bounce back to the other side having the advantage, at some point, Reigns is going to get what we think is his revenge, right? And that may come in the WarGame setting or whatever, but I think that's also going to be the spot where it's the biggest reason to bring The Rock back at that point, to have him come back, final boss, original Tribal Chief. The power dynamic and the struggle continues when it comes to who is really in charge of the bloodline. But you guys let me know what you think. When does The Rock make his return? Again, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I know some people have pushed the idea that maybe he could come back for WarGames. I just don't know if that's going to happen. Would certainly, make things very interesting if he did, but I think that is maybe going to be the point where we get to in a couple months, where that is where we start to see how WWE has connected everything together, just like they have been doing with this Bloodline story. You guys let me know your ideas for The Rock's return. When's it going to happen, and what's he going to do? As always, appreciate your feedback. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out, and let me know your thoughts on when the final boss, The Rock, will make his return, and how will it impact the future of the Bloodline.